A man gets pulled over by the police. The officer walks up to the car and says, "Sir, I pulled you over because you ran that stop sign back there." The man says, "But I slowed down." The officer replied, "But you didn't stop." The man said again, "But I slowed down." Again the officer said, "But you didn't stop." The man said again, "But I slowed down." The officer had finally had enough. He told the man to get out and immediately started hitting the man with his nightstick. The officer then said to the man, "Now, do you want me to slow down or do you want me to stop?" The boss called one of his employees into the office. "Rob," he said, "you've been with the company for a year. You started off in the post room. 1 week later, you were promoted to a sales position. And 1 month after that, you were promoted to district manager of the sales department. Just 4 short months later, you were promoted to vice chairman. Now it's time for me to retire, and I want you to take over the company. What do you say to that?" "Thanks," said the employee. "Thanks?" the boss replied. Is that all you can say?" "I suppose not," the employee said. "Thanks, Dad." 2 gas company servicemen, a senior training supervisor and a young trainee, were out checking meters in a suburban neighborhood. They parked their truck the end of the alley and worked their way to the other end. At the last house, a woman looking out her kitchen window watched the 2 men as they checked her gas meter. Finishing the meter check, the senior supervisor challenged his younger coworker to a foot race down the alley back to the truck to prove that an older guy could outrun a younger one. As they came running up to the truck, they realized the lady from that last house was huffing and puffing right behind them. They stopped and asked her what was wrong. Gasping for breath, she replied, "When I see 2 gas men running as hard as you 2 were, I figured I'd better run too." 2 children are in a doctor's waiting room, and one of them is crying. "Why are you crying?" asked the other child. "I'm here for a blood test, and they're going to cut my finger." When he heard this, the other child started to cry. "Why are you crying?" "I'm here for a urine test." A 54-year-old accountant leaves a letter for his wife one Friday evening and reads, "Dear wife, I am 54, and by the time you receive this letter, I will be at the Grand Hotel with my beautiful and sexy 18-year-old secretary." When he arrived at the hotel, there was a letter waiting for him as follows. "Dear husband, I too am 54, and by the time you receive this letter, I will be at the Hilton Hotel with my handsome and virile 18-year-old toy boy. You being an accountant will therefore appreciate that 18 goes into 54 many, many more times than 54 goes into 18. A robber was robbing a house when he heard a voice. "Jesus is watching you." "Who's there?" the robber said. But no sound was heard, so he kept going, and he heard it 2 more times when he spotted a parrot. "What's your name?" the robber asked. "Cocodora," said the parrot. "Now what kind of idiot would name a bird Cocodora?" said the robber. "The same idiot who named the Rottweiler Jesus," said the parrot. A lady walked into a pet store and said, "I want a parrot, but I only want one that talks." The manager said, "We have one parrot that talks all the time." So the lady bought the parrot and went home. The next day she went back to the pet store and said, "You told me that parrot talks all the time. I have not heard him say a word." The man said, "I'm very sorry. He talked all the time when he was here. Why don't you buy him a little swing? They just love the little swings." So she bought the little swing and put it in the bird's cage. The next day, she came back to the pet store and said, "The parrot swings all the time, but I still haven't heard a word." The man said, "I'm really sorry. We have these little mirrors. The birds love to look at themselves and talk to themselves." So the lady bought the mirror and put it in the bird's cage. The next day she returned to the pet store and said, "The parrot looks at himself in the mirror and swings, but not a word." The man replied, "We have these little ladders. The birds love to go up and down the ladder." So the lady bought a ladder and put it in the cage. The next morning when the lady woke up, the parrot was near death. She returned again to the pet store and told the man the bird had died. He replied, "I can't believe all those days and the parrot never said a word." She replied, "Well, he finally did talk. Just before he died, he said, 'That store where you bought all these things, don't they sell birdseed?'" A well-respected surgeon was relaxing on his sofa one evening just after arriving home from work. As he was tuning into the evening news, the phone rang. The doctor calmly answered it and heard the familiar voice of a colleague on the other end of the line. "We need a fourth for poker," said the friend. "I'll be right over," whispered the doctor. As he was putting on his coat, his wife asked, "Is it serious?" "Oh yes, quite serious," said the doctor gravely. "In fact, 3 doctors are there already." 2 tourists were driving through Wisconsin. As they were approaching Oconomowoc, they started arguing about the pronunciation of the town's name. They argued back and forth until they stopped for lunch. As they stood at the counter, one tourist asked the blonde employee, "Before we order, could you please settle an argument for us? Would you please pronounce where we are, very slowly?" The blonde girl leaned over the counter and said, King. The difference between dogs and cats. A dog thinks, "Hey, these people I live with feed me, love me, provide me with a nice warm dry house, pet me and take good care of me. They must be gods." A cat thinks, "Hey, these people I live with feed me, love me, provide me with a nice warm dry house, pet me and take good care of me. I must be a god." Little Johnny was having trouble with math. So, his teacher decided to pull him aside for someone on one work. She said, "Johnny, if I gave you 2 bunnies plus 2 more bunnies plus 2 more bunnies, how many would you have?" Little Johnny thought for a moment and said, 7. His teacher said, "Let's think about it again. If I gave you 2 bunnies plus 2 bunnies plus 2 bunnies, how many would you have?" Once again, little Johnny said, 7. The teacher decided to try it another way. "Okay, Johnny, if I gave you 2 apples plus 2 apples plus 2 apples, how many would you have?" Little Johnny said, 6. "Very good," said the teacher. "But Johnny, why do you keep telling me you'd have 7 bunnies if I gave you 2 bunnies plus 2 more plus 2 more?" Little Johnny answered, "Because I've already got one at home." An Aggie owned a pig farm and his friend came by to visit. The friend noticed the Aggie picking up a pig, feeding him an apple, then picking up another pig and feeding him an apple and continuing to do this with each individual pig. The friend says, "Wouldn't it be a lot faster to put all the apples down on the ground and let the pigs eat them rather than feeding them one by one?" The Aggie replies, "What's time to a pig?" A young mother was getting ready to feed her 2-year-old daughter lunch. She asked the child, "What would you like for lunch today?" The little girl answered, "Ice cream." Not wanting to cause a big argument, the mother then said, "And what else would you like with your ice cream?" The little girl thought for a moment and said, "A spoon."